There are fluctuating levels of 4 different pathogens in our system and our bodies at all times, and that is bacteria, viruses, parasites, and yeast. We have a healthy balance of bacteria and yeast in our gut at all times, and we need the probiotic versions of the bacteria and of the yeast that they help us, they serve us in some way. The parasites and the viruses, not so much. But the yeast we do have always in our system. Yeast can cause problems and is really commonly known in babies to cause diaper rash, and women to cause vaginal yeast infections, and for children and infants and even adults to get thrush like in their mouth, where it's like a white coating. Yeast can lead to bloating in the GI tract. It can basically grow anywhere on the body. And when the system has become severely out of balance and we're having GI problems, we're having skin problems, we're having immune issues, we're having a whole bunch of different stuff going on, it's very easy for the yeast to like that environment and for the good bacteria levels to go down and the bad bacteria to go up. Same as what happens with bacteria. Probiotics go down and the bad bacteria goes up in the gut. So it's very similar. So if you're having gut issues and you're having low levels of probiotics, then you're probably having low levels of the pro yeast in your system as well. I had major issues with yeast to the point where I was on um, so many different treatments for yeast, and I had it in like every part of my body. I had it in my ears, on my scalp. You could see it in my eyes would get like crusty and mucousy. My nose was always itchy. My corners of my mouth and all like around my mouth, on my face, and around my eyes, on the skin on my eyes. Um, Vaginal, I had like adults can get like diaper rash like symptoms as well. And did I say my ears? Like you can get it anywhere where there's like a mucous membrane, which is like the pink part of your body. Like every single hole essentially in your body is a mucous membrane. And that's where yeast is going to be the most likely to grow because it's coming from inside the body, and that's like your entrance to the inside of your body everywhere. And then when it gets systemic enough, it can grow on the skin, and it can easily get into the hair, and it can look like psoriasis or eczema in the hair. There's some different qualities to that. It can be wetter and just never, it could be really itchy. And it often comes along with having chronic yeast infections in other places in the body. So I had started having yeast problems when I was really little. Of course, like as a baby, you get diaper rash, and then little girls are like more susceptible to getting yeast infections. And it was something that I dealt with like pretty bad. I remember as 3 or 4 years old having yeast problems and needing to see a doctor for it. And then that pretty much like went away for a long time. Like I think until like my 20s, like I didn't have any problem with that. When I started having all of my chronic issues and the Lyme symptoms is when it came back. I also want to mention that in the 90s is when I was a kid, and it was very much the high sugar diet, like unbeknownst to our parents for the most part. It was like a really high sugar diet. Our cereals were massively pounded with sugar, and it was just like normal to have cereals with that kind of stuff. Frozen foods, Lunchables, even fish sticks, like different various things, macaroni and cheese, so many different foods that were like normal kid foods had so much sugar in it. And like I think of like Dunkaroos that we had, like so many just things that were like seen as just like a normal snack were actually like so high in sugar. And it just wasn't really that known that, like, we knew that it had sugar, but we didn't know to like the extent that it had it. And sugar is what feeds our Candida. And along with yeast that you eat. So there's like a lot of contributors to having yeast. Um, when I was in my 20s and I started to have like the major yeast problems, it definitely was affecting my GI. I was having bloating issues all the time. I was having yeast infections all the time. And I didn't know like that the stuff that was going on with my around my mouth and in my nose always being itchy and my eyes always being itchy and having like some crusty stuff and everything and my ears always being infected and always like producing so much buildup in them so fast. That was like a huge thing. Was I remember a doctor saying you can't possibly have earwax building up that quickly, because I would go in and get it flushed and then I would have to go in a couple days later, like 2 or 3 days later, and I would have massive amounts of earwax because it would plug up my ears so much I couldn't hear. And then I would get like an ear infection because there was no airflow to my ear. So that was when they were like, huh, this, like what's going on? And then I had another ear flush another time, and someone went like, wow, this doesn't look like earwax. This looks like yeast. And so yeah, there were a lot of things that like people kind of started going like, wait a minute, this isn't how earwax usually works. And my ears were just always itchy. And little tip there is I've been taking fish oil, krill oil specifically, which I don't I eat fish because it doesn't settle well with me. It never has, but I am able to take the krill oil, and I've been taking it for maybe 3 months now, and I've noticed a huge improvement in my ears. It's not getting buildup like it was. Of course, I am like in a really good state physically now with my health overall. However, 3 months ago, I was, still in a really good state, and I was having this buildup of wax in my ears regardless. So, when I started having the chronic yeast, like mainly knowing by vaginal infection that that's what was going on, I wasn't really into the holistic stuff yet and the natural stuff. This was very early on in it, probably like my early 20s, like 23, 24 maybe. And I saw my gynecologist and she prescribed me fluconazole. So I took a round of that for it was like 3 weeks or something. Every 3 days you take it. And it was like, oh wow, this is amazing. This is great. It's helping so much. And then I stopped it, and I ended up having a massive rebound from it. So as soon as I stopped it, it was like 3 days later when I would have needed the next dose that it started coming back, and it came back with a vengeance. So I went back and I told her, okay, this happened. And she's like, okay, well, here's another round. So I did another round. And then she said, okay, well, you're only supposed to have like X amount of these in a year. Fluconazole has a lot of negatives to taking it, or medications that are like that, basically prescription anti-yeast, anything like that. So I think she gave me some topical stuff too to put on, which I usually burn really bad to any kind of steroids, like any kind of creams or anything like that. And so I believe that what she gave me really burned. I'm almost positive about that. But anyway, so she gave me 6 months of the 6 months of the fluconazole every 3 days. And so while I was on it, it was great. I wasn't having any yeast problems. It all cleared up. I stopped, and so soon after I stopped, I had that rebound effect again, and it was worse than ever. So I went back, and she's like, oh, that's so weird. She's like, well, I just don't know what to do. And I'm like sitting there like, hello, this is way worse. What you gave me as treatment has made this like 10 times as worse. It was excruciating. It was so itchy. It hurt just to like move and sit, and let alone get my skin wet or anything like that. And it like had spread across to like the outside of my skin. It was really bad. And so I was like, something's not right here. Like, why would you and she literally didn't know. She was like, I don't really know that much about this, and this was one of the first main things where my brain went like, red flag, red flag. What is going on with the Western medical community? I had already been dealing with Western medicine since I was 19, like knowing that I wasn't really getting any help and nobody really knew what to do with Lyme disease or the previous diagnosis of fibromyalgia. But like yeast infections are super common, right? So it's like, okay, why do you not know how to treat a yeast infection? And then when she literally didn't have any answers for me and she was questioning out loud to herself and me, like, about about antifungal stuff, and I was just like, oh my god, this is crazy. So I started doing like some major research on that and realizing that there are very few pharmaceuticals that are for yeast because they're all very similar to the fluconazole. They will treat something. If it's not a systemic problem, if it's not somebody that has a severe chronic illness, it will treat it and go away, and that person probably won't have like a rebound effect or an issue. If there's any chronic systemic issue going on, meaning that it's not just in that localized area, but you're having it throughout your whole system, most likely throughout your GI tract, which is what spreads it around like your face and stuff like that, and into your hair. And so it just becomes crazy, and there's no treatment for that. There's no pharmaceutical treatment for that. So then I started looking into other stuff and seeing that there was lots of herbal remedies for it. And so I looked into all different kinds of herbal remedies, from like olive leaf extract and garlic. Needing garlic and onions in general is really good for it. Ginger. There's a lot of like heating foods that can treat it. I'm trying to think of like specifically any other herbs that I use. It's been quite a while. I was already majorly adapting my diet to what my body was asking for, and I had already started learning about nightshades and cutting them out, and learning about gluten and dairy, and realizing that those things just really didn't vibe with me. And so I started eating even better to like towards a Candida thing and cutting out more carbs, which did subside. Doing the combination of grapeseed oil is another really, really good one for make sure it's actually grapeseed oil, because there are some that aren't. So like if you're looking at ingredients of grapeseed oil, make sure it actually says from grape seeds. I learned that the hard way. Even a practitioner that prescribed them to me said, wait a minute, like a couple months later, don't take that one anymore. Here's a different one. So I tried like a whole bunch of different stuff, and I also had cut out sugar. So there was a huge dietary change, and that really, really helped sticking to it, and doing the herbal remedies to help kill the stuff off. It took a long time to get it like manageable. And then any time that I was doing any other kind of treatment where it would like take the imbalance of bacteria down and the imbalance of yeast stuff down, I would have a huge flare of it. So when you're doing anything for antibiotic wise, which is what I was doing for Lyme, it is going to be killing all the bacteria in your gut and in your entire body system. And so as it's killing off that bacteria, it's killing off the good probiotics in your gut as well. And you have like a good balance of bacteria and yeast in the gut, and they always like work together to keep each other in balance. So if your bacteria is lessening and lessening because of the antibiotics, then your yeast suddenly has like all this room to grow. And there's the good yeast and the bad yeast. And if you're creating an acidic environment, which is going to be created from taking antibiotics and from the illness in your body itself, and from extra inflammation and detox stuff that's causing inflammation in the body, you're going to have a massive growth of yeast, because bad bacteria and bad yeast like to live in an acidic environment. And that's what's being created when you're doing treatments temporarily as your body is adjusting and going through this stuff, because you're essentially like poisoning your system with pharmaceutical antibiotics. It is a mold toxin. That's what an antibiotic is. So when there's that huge imbalance, you have this massive overgrowth of yeast, and that yeast is going to be absorbed through your intestinal walls, and then it's going to go into your bloodstream, and then it's going to go to all the organs in your body. And wherever you have a weak spot in your body where it can feed off of your sugar intake, it's going to find a place to be there. So you can get yeast, as you can get bacteria, you can get infections anywhere. You can also get yeast infections anywhere. Contrary to what a Western medical physician might say, because they are not trained to treat yeast, because there is no pharmaceutical for it. And if you think about it, doctors go to school and they are either trauma doctors, surgeons, or they prescribe pharmaceuticals. So if you're not going for a broken bone or a car accident, or you're not going in for surgery, every other specialist you see, every other general doctor that you see, they're going to tell you to eat better without many guidelines to that. They're going to tell you to lose weight if you're overweight, and they're going to prescribe you a pharmaceutical. Those are the three things that they're going to do for you. So if there's no if you're telling them that you've changed your diet, and then there's nothing for them to say about that. And if you're not overweight, there's nothing for them to say about that. And if you have if they don't have a pharmaceutical to prescribe you, they're going to either tell you it's in your head, or they're going to say that's not what's wrong. Or they're going to be honest and, like my gynecologist, tell you that they don't know. So I've had all three reactions to various different things that Western medicine hasn't been able to treat. So I ended up doing a really, really bad treatment out of desperation in 2018. Or 2017, I did this thing. It was a really funny name. It was called Antidulafungin. I don't even think it exists anymore. It was like in study phase, and I went to the Lyme treatment center that I had gone to 2 years prior to that for this treatment. When I had a relapse from a short remission after the first treatment, I went back there and said, hey, I'm having all this stuff. My yeast is out of control. It's worse than ever. The yeast infections were way worse vaginally, extremely excruciating. My head was constantly peeling, and it was like dandruff just constantly falling out all the time. I had that dandruff like skin all around my face, my eyes, my nose, my mouth. It was everywhere. It was horrible. I looked at it, felt bad, emotionally was messing with me so much. There's so many layers to having chronic illness and yeast problems. So I went there. It was a IV infusion of basically a medication like fluconazole. Now, I was in such desperation that I was just listening to what my Lyme doctors are telling me, and like, even though I knew that this is not like I think there was like a part of my gut intuition telling me like, I don't think this is the right thing to do. But I was so desperate because I was in so much pain, and it was affecting everything so much. And I like couldn't live life. It was affecting everything. So I went in and I did it. It almost killed me. I literally almost died from this. And it was one of the scariest moments that I've ever had. My parents and I we've had multiple conversations over the years, but this was one of them where it was kind of like, I might not make it through this. And it just was what it was. I was in a wheelchair after this. I was down to the weight that I was when I was in middle school, and I barely had the strength to do anything at this point. So I spent the next year like just pretty much not doing much of anything except for brain retraining, just like recuperating from this. It was awful. And one other component to yeast is mold. So if there is mold in your environment, if there's mold in your house, if there's mold at your workplace, you are going to be, it's fungus. It's the same thing as what's in your body. Yeast is fungus. Fungus is yeast. It's the same thing. So mold in your environment is creating spores that you're breathing in that are getting on your skin, your hair. You're, as you eat, you're ingesting it, you're swallowing that as you breathe in. Some of that's going to go into your GI tract, and so and it just weakens the toxins from the mold in the environment weaken your system regardless. So if your immune system's down, you're having yeast problems already, and then you have mold, it could go either way. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Did you have the yeast problems first, or was it the mold in your environment that made you susceptible to having the yeast? It could go either way. So we had mold in our house and it was remediated. And after that, like, a lot of my stuff started clearing up. I was also doing other things. I was doing brain retraining. I had stem cell therapy, and I was seeing 2 different Chinese naturopaths for different things. And along with doing a couple other things that were really, really helping. But mold and yeast, systemic Candida yeast, have a correlation there. So if you can't get rid of the yeast in your system, definitely, if you're considering that there might be mold in your house, if you know that there's water damage, that there's water leaking somewhere, even if you can't see the mold, that's what our situation was. We knew that there was leaking windows, but there was no mold, no visible mold, and we busted open the wall, and literally the whole back of the house was covered in mold. It was just all behind the walls, and it was in the family room where I was always sitting. So yeah, the huge combination of things is what actually cured it for me. It was all along with, like, the Lyme healing and, everything that went along with all the chronic stuff for me. It all comes in a package. The parasites were in there, everything. As I realized, I needed to strengthen my system. I needed to stop fighting and killing stuff, and I just needed to work on supporting my body and giving it, like, the love and nourishment it needs, without trying to put all this chemicals, these IV bags, and whether it was natural vitamins or pharmaceutical antibiotics. It didn't matter what it was. My body was still having to process all that stuff I was pounding it with. So it was when I stopped doing that and I started just supporting my system that's what ended up doing it all for me. If you have any questions about your Candida or yeast, please leave them down below, and maybe I'll have an answer for you. If you have a story or anything about yours, please leave it down below. I'd love to hear it and talk to you about it, and it might help somebody else who's reading the comments as well. All right, well, I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.